Okay, so in that context, I want to return to this idea of resilient landscapes and try and sort of define them in broad terms and then sort of focus in on some of those elements. That these landscapes are really composed of farms, forests and settlements that can provide for the diversity of local needs without excessive dependence on imported or complex technologies or resources. So we need our environment around us to be providing for most of our needs. And of course that is the very opposite of what we have at present. And whether we are talking about our rural landscapes, of our broadacre farms, or whether we're talking about our inner city areas or our suburbs or our peri-urban settlement areas like the Blue Mountains, none of these landscapes do this. If they do, they have this excessive dependence on imported or complex technologies and resources. The second thing is that they need to be able to adapt to change, to adapt to climate change, to rising energy costs and economic stress without collapsing. And they need to be able to recover from natural disasters, including bushfires. So this idea of resilience is a shift of focus away from the focus on productivity and efficiency that has driven the economic rationalists towards ideas and strategies like the just-in-time manufacturing, where you don't have anything stored in warehouses, you just take things from the production line and straight into where it's needed, the next stage down the production line. This sort of insanity dressed up as smart design is what pulls the resilience out of the system. What is hard for this sort of mindset to accept is for things to be able to continue through shocks and changed conditions. There's got to be fat in the system. There's got to be looseness in the connections rather than this rigidity of efficiently connected systems. So when people use coals as their food cupboard, knowing that it's always available and ignoring the fact that there's 2 days supply in the system, people are sort of buying into a very, very fragile system, disguised as being very strong because of its size and its importance. And maybe that's so important that the authorities will always make sure it works because we couldn't live without it. And that is a very childish, dependent response that our forefathers would have regarded as gross irresponsibility. And including our leaders in the past would have regarded it, even in terms of the defence of the country, to be highly irresponsible. And yet we have moved into that situation. So, of course, I've chosen very deliberately photos that maybe challenge some of the orthodoxies. Firewood, carbon neutral energy rather than fuel for bushfires. So we'll go and look more at those issues. But I want to also mention about what resilient communities look like. Resilient communities are composed of households, neighbourhoods and networks of and overlapping groups of people that can self-organise to provide for their needs without excessive dependency. That can deal with stress and disaster by pooling resources and cooperating for physical and social recovery. And that can resist the counterproductive tendencies to scapegoat groups within the community or to fall back on over-dependence on centralised authority. My photographs are our Shire Mayor, Rod May, delivering a veggie box from his organic farm. He produces hundreds of these veggie boxes a week that go into supplying food to the local community. The other photo is of my neighbours, Jack and Loris Monaghan, in their 80s, who I think are the only other people in our street who have 100% commitment to staying and defending in all situations. And that culture of self-reliance and yet community connectedness is one of the things we see in resilient communities that used to be part of Australian rural communities everywhere, but increasingly this has been lost. Okay, so in focusing in on these bushfire resistant landscapes, the first, I suppose, dissident view from an environmental perspective that I need to place is that our bushfire resistant landscapes involve actively managed forests as well as productive and sustainable farms. The actively managed forests are ones where utilisation of the forest reduces the risk of loss and aids in recovery from fire. These are principles of sustainable forestry that apply everywhere in the world, and certainly in our fire-prone eucalypt forests. This is actually a photo from our eco-village in central Victoria, where we have an eco-village of greenies living in the bush, and we cut down trees. Well, we actually thin out the forest. And that is not actually contentious within our eco-village. That is part of how it was set up and designed. We might not think that productive and sustainable farms is necessarily connected to our landscapes being bushfire resilient, but in fact, where we build soil that can hold nutrients and water for sustainable production, they're also ones that can recover from fire. When we build high and balanced fertility, the plants we grow actually contain more minerals in their leaves and are less flammable. That might seem like a minor factor. It's the main factor that distinguishes our food gardens from our wondrous sclerophyll native vegetation adapted to extremely low fertility. Because high fertility actually encourages the type of vegetation growth which is naturally fire retardant. All minerals in plant leaves are fire retardants. It doesn't matter whether it's salt in saltbush or phosphorus and calcium in an apple tree. So in our farm landscapes, the greater that moisture and nutrient holding capacity, the greater we build plant material which decomposes naturally and is also palatable plant material for animals. So there's a strong connection between these issues. And the third element is fire-resistant homestead gardens and residential zones that can provide a refuge with houses as the ultimate refuge. And I believe it's possible with appropriate design that we can say these areas are safe, can be made safe from the worst of bushfires. Of course, there's a lot of places that people live where you say, well, maybe someone shouldn't actually be living there, because they are places where it's not possible to grow food. And yet the most sustainable place to grow food, fresh food, is where people live. And of course, this is a challenging issue in this region itself. So these priorities in settlements are firstly houses as the prime assets and as refuges. And I believe any reasonably constructed house based on the science can be defended by able-bodied people. That doesn't mean to say there's not a big range in how easy a house is to defend. But we do know that the presence of one able-bodied person exceeds any other design factor by between 2 and 4 times. And of course, Australia has the best base of science data on, science-based data on this subject. And irrigated food gardens as fire-resistant buffers are our best defence. Because they are naturally fire retardant, because we clearly must have water systems to be able to irrigate them for them to be productive, and because the intensive management of them that deals with excess dry biomass and turns it into compost is a natural part of managing those systems. And because they are at their peak in a cool climate right in the summer bushfire season. Where we're dealing with more bushfire-prone landscapes, we need new settlement models. We really can't get this sustainable settlement model using the current freehold cookie-cutter subdivision pattern. We have to have co-ownership of common land and infrastructure and community enterprises and land use with houses and gardens that can be privately owned. And this is quite simple to do with co-housing and body corporate land tenure models. I don't believe there's any basis for conventional subdivision on separate titles in highly bushfire prone areas. I mean, there's other problems with that pattern of subdivision, of reasons to not persist with that pattern for sustainability reasons, but certainly for fire. Okay, so what about the contentious issue of fuel reduction burning? And maybe it's not even contentious. We should remind ourselves that actually virtually all the mainstream environmental organisations completely accept fuel reduction burning, even if a lot of greenies, including myself, are very sceptical about it. Fuel reduction burning is really the only method to quickly reduce fuel over large areas at low costs. This is a reality that we need to accept. We can't go out and rake all of the Blue Mountains, rake up the litter. And of course, the ideal fuel reduction burn only consumes the dry litter and leaves the trees and the soil compost undamaged. But this is more the exception than the rule. And there's a lot of problems that occur with fuel reduction burning and over-reliance on it. It's more typical when it's done on a large scale that it's too hot, because there's a sort of real Goldilocks problem where it's not hot enough to actually burn the designated area with the labour available in the time available, or it does the area effectively but it more looks like this. And what we get is we get loss of soil carbon and nutrients, we get damage to trees, we get new fuel from fallen dry leaves and from this epicormic regrowth, which doesn't last very long. Once the canopy comes back, these epicormic shoots die and you've got more fuel up the trees. This loss of soil carbon of nutrients is something that no one really wants to look at. There is some good scientific studies that have been done on it and the results are pretty damning, but no one knows what to do about it. And it's not picked up much by the biological scientists from a conservation point of view, because most of them say, well, you've still got the same species there, so well, you can't see the changes in nutrients, so we don't worry about that. Now, maybe I'm being cynical in saying that, but That seems to me what it appears to be.